The day I learned my parents had sold my childhood home, I wasn't standing beside them. I wasn't signing the papers. I wasn't even told it was happening. I found out from a stranger holding the keys. 5 years later, those same parents stood outside my front door with 2 old suitcases, asking if they could live with me. But before that happened, you need to understand why that little house meant everything to me. My name is Ethan Carter. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Boston. Our house wasn't fancy. The roof leaked every winter. The kitchen was small. The paint peeled from the front porch. But it was the only place that ever felt like home. My father used to say, "One day this house will stay in the family forever." As a teenager, I believed every word. I had one older sister, Olivia. She was the favorite. If she made a mistake, my parents defended her. If I succeeded, they simply expected more. After college, I moved to Chicago and became a software engineer. The job was demanding, but it paid well. Every month, I sent money home. When the water heater broke, I paid for a new one. When mom needed surgery, I covered the hospital bills. When the roof had to be replaced, I paid that too. I never asked for anything in return because they were my family. One Friday evening, Mom called me. "Ethan, why don't you come home next weekend? We're having a family barbecue." I smiled. I've missed everyone. I booked the first flight I could. The next Saturday afternoon, I drove down the familiar street with 2 fresh apple pies sitting on the passenger seat. I couldn't wait to see home again, but as I turned the corner, my smile disappeared. A huge white sign stood in the front yard. Sold. I slammed on the brakes. This can't be right. Before I could even reach the front door, a man I'd never seen before walked outside, holding the keys to my childhood home. He looked at me and smiled. "You must be Ethan. We've been expecting you." The stranger noticed the confusion on my face. "I'm sorry," he said politely. "I thought your parents had already told you." I couldn't answer. My eyes stayed fixed on the Sold sign in the yard. "What do you mean?" He looked uncomfortable. "We closed on the house yesterday." Yesterday. My parents had sold the home I'd grown up in and never even called me. Just then, the front door opened. My mother walked outside. For a split second, she looked shocked to see me. "Ethan, you weren't supposed to be here until tonight." I frowned. "What happened? Why is there a sold sign in the yard?" She looked away. "We were going to tell you." "When?" "After everything was finalized." Before she could say another word, my father stepped onto the porch. His expression was cold. "We needed the money." I stared at him. "You sold the house?" Without even asking me, he sighed impatiently. "It wasn't your decision to make." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is our family home." Dad folded his arms. "No, it was our house, and we sold it." I looked from him to Mom. "Why?" No one answered. Finally, Olivia walked outside carrying designer shopping bags. She rolled her eyes. "Can we stop making this dramatic?" It was just a house. I looked at her in disbelief. Then I noticed something parked in the driveway. A brand new luxury SUV. Still wearing temporary dealer plates, I slowly turned back to my father. "Don't tell me." He remained silent. Mom quietly whispered, "Olivia had a lot of debt. We had to help her." At that moment, everything finally made sense. The house hadn't been sold because my parents had no choice. It had been sold to rescue my sister, while the son who had spent years paying their bills was never even given a phone call. I looked down at the 2 apple pies still in my hands. Then, without saying a single word, I placed them gently on the porch, turned around, walked back to my car, and drove away without looking back. For weeks, I ignored every call from my parents. Every voicemail ended the same way. "Please call us back." I never did, not because I hated them, because every time I thought about that house, I remembered standing in the front yard like a stranger, watching someone else unlock the front door. That memory hurt more than I could explain. A month later, I made a promise to myself. If my family no longer had a place for me, I'd build a new life on my own. I threw myself into work. Days became weeks, weeks became years. I was promoted twice. Then I left my job and started my own software company. The first year was difficult. I worked 16-hour days. I invested every dollar I had. There were moments I thought I'd fail, but I didn't quit. 3 years later, My company had clients across the country. For the first time in my life, I bought a home, not a mansion, just a beautiful house with a large front porch, the kind of home I'd always dreamed of having. One quiet Sunday morning, I was drinking coffee on that porch when my phone rang. It was my aunt. I hadn't spoken to her in years. "Ethan, have you heard?" "Heard what?" There was a long pause. "Your parents lost everything." I sat up. "What do you mean?" "After selling the house, they used most of the money to pay Olivia's debts. But she kept borrowing. She started another business. It failed. Now the bank has taken almost everything they own." I closed my eyes. "And Olivia." My aunt sighed. "She moved to California 6 months ago. She hasn't called them since." The daughter they had sacrificed everything for had disappeared. That evening, as the sun began to set, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked through the window. An old taxi was parked outside. The driver unloaded 2 worn-out suitcases. Then my father slowly stepped out. He looked older, thinner, tired. A few seconds later, my mother got out of the car. She looked at my house, then quietly reached for my father's hand. Together, they walked toward my front door. Dad knocked softly. When I opened it, neither of them spoke. Finally, my father lowered his head. The same man who had once told me, "It wasn't your decision to make," now looked me in the eyes and quietly said, "Ethan, we have nowhere else to go." My father stood silently at my front door. His shoulders were slumped. The man who had always seemed so proud now looked completely broken. "Ethan, we have nowhere else to go." For a moment, none of us spoke. Then I stepped aside. "Come in." My mother burst into tears. "Thank you." They walked inside, carrying the only 2 suitcases they had left. I made them coffee. The silence around the table felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Finally, Dad spoke. "The bank took our apartment last week. We've sold almost everything." I looked at him. "And Olivia?" Mom wiped away her tears. "We haven't heard from her in 8 months. She changed her phone number." Dad stared at his coffee. "I spent my whole life protecting her. And when everything fell apart, she disappeared." I took a deep breath. "I warned you." Dad slowly nodded. "You did. I just didn't want to hear it." For the first time in my life, he admitted I had been right. A few minutes later, Dad reached into his jacket and placed an old envelope on the table. "I found this while packing." I looked at it. It was an old family photo. The 4 of us, standing in front of our childhood home. I smiled sadly. "I thought we'd always have that house." Dad's eyes filled with tears. So did I. I broke my promise. He looked directly at me. "I didn't just sell a house. I sold a place where our family belonged." After a long silence, he stood up. "We're not here for your money. If you want us to leave, we'll understand." I looked at both of them, then quietly said, "You can stay. But I have one condition." Dad looked surprised. "Anything?" I met his eyes. "No more favorites. No more choosing one child over another. If we're going to be a family again, we start over as equals." My mother immediately nodded. Dad's voice cracked. "I promise." For the first time in years, it sounded like he truly meant it. My father looked at me for a long moment. Then he quietly nodded. "No more favorites." I should have said those words years ago. For the first time since I was a child, I believed him. Over the next few months, my parents stayed in my guest room. They insisted on helping around the house. Dad mowed the lawn every Saturday. Mom cooked dinner almost every evening. They kept trying to repay me, not with money, but with effort. One afternoon, Dad asked if we could take a drive. We ended up on Maple Street, in front of my childhood home. The house looked different. The new owners had painted it white. The old oak tree was gone. The porch swing my grandfather built had disappeared. Dad stood quietly beside me. "I thought selling this house would solve our problems." He shook his head. "It only destroyed the family I was trying to protect." For the first time, he cried, not because he had lost the house, because he had almost lost his son. A few weeks later, there was another knock on my front door. When I opened it, I saw Olivia. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had driven away in a luxury SUV. Her expensive clothes were gone. Her eyes were filled with regret. "Ethan, I'm sorry." I looked at her. "For what?" She lowered her head. for letting Mom and Dad sacrifice everything for me, for never appreciating what you did. I thought they would always rescue me. I was wrong. There was a long silence. Then I stepped aside. Come in. She looked surprised. You're not angry. I smiled sadly. I was. For a long time. But carrying anger only hurts the person carrying it. She burst into tears. For the first time in our lives, we hugged like brother and sister. That Christmas, our family gathered around the dinner table again. Not in my childhood home, but in mine. Dad stood up with a glass of sparkling cider. I want to make one final promise. He looked at both of his children. From today forward, I don't have a favorite. I have 2 children, and I will never forget the difference. Mom reached over and held my hand. Olivia smiled through her tears. For the first time, it felt like we were truly a family. Later that night, as everyone laughed around the fireplace, I looked out the window. I realized something. My childhood home was gone forever, but a house is only made of wood and bricks. A home is built with love, respect, and forgiveness. And after all those years, we had finally found our way home again.